Pokemon Infinite Fusion has so many awesome fusions and tends to have references such as Monster Hunter. Like, look how cool these are. So I decided to see if I could beat Pokemon Infinite Fusion as a hardcore Nuzlocke with only Monster Hunter fusions. Will my monsters prevail? Let's find out. I named my rival guild member as Monster Hunter hunters are a part of a guild. I grabbed Charmander and named him Fatalis. Guild member fuses Squirtle and Bulbasaur and beats me, unfortunately. You may have won this fight, but I will smite you next time. I then give Professor Oak his parcel. He then gives me a Pokedex and 5 Pokeballs. I run into a Fletching. I catch it and name it Basilgeuse. I catch a Teddiursa and name him Rozoros. I catch a Spinarak and name it Atal-Ka. I catch a Larvesta and name it Torridcless. I catch a Swinub and name it Gammoth. Next, I take on Brock. And this is the remix mode, so Brock is a steel type user. He starts off with Arduck, who luckily didn't have a water type move. Gammoth is able to beat it with a few mud slaps. Steed Jr. comes out and I switch to Fatalis, and with a few embers, he's able to take down Steed Jr. While training, I run into a wild Charmander and I decide to catch it as it will complete my Fatalis fusion. I then fuse my 2 Charmanders together. I buy a Magikarp and name it Lagiacrus. I then catch a Rockruff and fuse it with Azuros to complete it as well. I then catch a Geodude after smashing some rocks and name it Brachydios. Also, Fatalis evolves. I then beat up some Team Rocket grunts in Mount Moon. Unfortunately, while battling a grunt, Azuros ends up fainting. Afterwards, Fatalis then evolves again. I then take on another Team Rocket grunt, and this goes horribly wrong. She starts off with a Shieldta, who I thought was a Fire Steel, but is actually a Rock Fire type. The typing doesn't really matter as it just spams Protect and Takedown. I switch my Pokemon around until Shieldta takes itself down. Kildos goes down pretty easy, then Nosei comes out. And all I know about this thing at the time was that it's a Rock type, which counters my team, causing all of my Pokemon to faint. Round 2, here we go. This time with all of my Pokemon alive, and after training, I re-challenge the grunt. This time I start with Gammoth, who's able to take Shieldta down. Fatalis takes out Kildos. Gammoth sadly goes down. Atal-Ka is then able to finish Nosei off. I then fight the Fossil Nerd. He starts with a... Yeah, there's no way I'm going to pronounce this correctly, but here we go. Dumb Duck. That's what we're going with. Basilgeuse kills it pretty easy. Mapass comes out and wants to have a great Pokemon to switch in, so Basilgeuse sadly dies. Atal-Ka also dies, and Fatalis finishes off Mapass. Just for a Porilup to come out. Yay! A water type that I no longer have a counter to. Azuros faints again, and Fatalis somehow manages to live and beats Porilup. I then take the Helix Fossil. I then catch an Ekans and name it Tobikadachi. After some training, Lagiacrus evolves. While training, I encounter a shiny Murans. Yeah, I'm not joking. This is literally the 3rd shiny I have encountered in these projects. Like, what the heck? So I catch it because Murkrow is used for a Monster Hunter reference. After smashing rocks, traveling in Mount Moon, I find an Onix who is also material for a Monster Hunter reference, and I catch it. I then catch a Hoot Hoot to complete the reference involving Murkrow, and then I fuse them, and oh boy, yeah, this is an ugly fusion at first, but you'll eventually make the Monster Hunter reference, I promise. I then have another battle with guild member again. He starts with Cotton Ix, and I start off with Brachydios. So I switch to Fatalis to kill his Cottonix since it's part grass. He then brings out Solo V. I switch to Tobikadachi, which honestly, I don't know why I did this. It's clearly a psychic type. I then switch to Chris to finish it off. Rockruff comes out next, and I switch to Brachydios, who's able to defeat it with a magnitude. Ninard is next. Smackdown does decent damage. I then switch to Torridcless, who is able to burn it with Flame Body and finish it with Ember. On the way to Bill's house, I had a trainer battle and unfortunately lost Torridcless. I then find Bill fusing himself with his Rhydon, and he regrets it. He asks me to help unfuse him, so I help him and he gives me a ticket for the SS Anne. After some training, Brachydios evolves into a Graveler. I then take on Misty, who this time is an Ice-type user. I start off with Brachydios, who one-shots her Emacil with Rock Smash. She then sends out Frost Wrath. I switch into a Chris, who gets hit by a Confuse Ray. I use Leer several times to weaken Frost Wrath. I then spam Bite. She has a Citrus Berry and heals her Pokemon, so it takes a little longer, but it eventually dies. On my way to Vermilion City, I find a new Spinarak and catch it. I then pick up the old rod. I then go to the route right of Vermilion and catch a Joltik. I then do some fishing in Vermilion and catch Krabby. After some grinding, Tobikadachi evolves into Arbok. Malfestio also evolves. I then catch a Heracross to complete the fusion with Krabby for Shogun Centaur. I then fuse them together and add them to my team. On the way to the captain's room, I run into a guild member and we have a battle. I start off with Fatalis, who is able to defeat his Ninetard. Honruff comes out, so I switch to Tobikadachi to paralyze it. Then I switch to Brachydios, who then defeats it with Bulldoze. Malfestio is able to take care of his Caresta. Fatalis then wrecks Cottonixio, and Chris one-shots Solo V. I then help the captain with his seasickness and get cut. After some grinding, Shogun evolves, becoming our first official Monster Hunter reference. I then take on Lieutenant Surge and his fighting type Pokemon. He starts with Howlfisk, and I start off with Brachydios. Brachydios is able to bring Howlfisk down to the yellow but shortly faints. Malfestio is able to finish it off with a Zen Headbutt. A wing attack brings Koffloon to the yellow, and then he switches to his Houndlade, who takes a wing attack and then heals from a Citrus Berry. A second wing attack is able to finish it off. Koffloon then is finished by a wing attack, winning me the badge. I then clear some trees for this guy who gives me lemonade and shears. I then catch a Tangela to complete another Monster Hunter reference with Joltik. I then fuse Joltik and Tangela to make the mini Rachna Kadaki. I then help a scientist clear some Beedrills so we can get access to some Amber. She then gives me the old Amber. I then grab a bike voucher and grab a bike. I then pick up the XP share, and then I helped the assistant with an Abra and got the pokeradar. I then go to Route 9 and find a Kecleon and catch it. On Route 10 I find another Swinub and catch it. In Rock Tunnel I find a Golett and catch it to complete as material to finish a fusion. I catch another Golett to complete another fusion. I then find an Aeron to be my official encounter and catch it. I then fuse Swinub and Golett to become Gameth, and the other Golett with Spinarak to make Nurselia. I then grab the Noibat egg in Rock Tunnel. While battling the last trainer in Rock Tunnel, Malfestio unfortunately faints because of counter. Tobikadachi then faints to 2 Psybeams. I then hatch the Noibat egg and name it Astalos. While doing some grinding, Nurselia evolves. I then catch another Noibat to complete my Kushala Daora fusion. I then fuse the Noibat with my Aeron. I then catch a Houndour. Next, I go into the Pokemon Tower and battle guild member. But this attempt went really bad. I started off with Shogun, which was very much a mistake. He starts with Whimsiccio,
who's surprisingly bulky. I then switch to Nuzlocke, hoping that Poison Jab and Stomping Tantrum will kill it, but I was wrong. I switched to Gammoth before Nuzlocke dies, who then gets one shot by Giga Drain. Bruh. Fatalis then obliterates it. Aegon comes out, and I switch to Legaicrus, who is able to defeat it. Honrock comes out, and I switch to Shogun, who's able to defeat it. Sharpesta comes out, and I'm not certain what type this thing is, so I try Pin Missile, which did decent damage. I switch to Legaicrus, who faints to Rough Skin. Kushala Daora is able to finish it off. Fatalis beats his Duo V. His Ninard comes out and survives on 1 HP and has speed boost, so it then just wrecks my team. So attempt number 3. This time I start with Fatalis, who one-shots Whimsy-Ixio. Aegon comes out and faints to 2 Ice Fangs from Legaicrus. Honrock comes out, and I switch to Shogun. With a Bubble Beam and a Brick Break, Honrock is defeated. Sharpesta is next and faints to some Aerial Aces. Pin Missile almost defeats Duo V, but he's able to survive and kills Shogun. Legaicrus finishes off Duo V. Ninard is his last Pokemon and is defeated by Fatalis. We then see Team Rocket taking an older man upstairs. We decide to go to Celadon City to investigate. I then catch Cranidos in a rock tunnel to complete Glavenus. I then defuse it with Houndour. Fatalis evolves twice. I then find guild member battling some Team Rocket members. Erica then shows up and we investigate the sewers. After beating up some grunts, Glavenus evolves, and after some more beatdowns, Glavenus evolves again. After some grinding, Gammoth and Kushala evolve. I then take on Giovanni. He starts off with Honchzing, so I start off with Kushala. Honchzing proves to be very bulky, plus it having the black sludge doesn't help, thus causing Kushala to faint. Legaicrus is able to finish it off with an Aqua Tail. Kekgon is next. Ice Fang brings it down to half health. It then uses Dragon Tail and brings out Gammoth, which honestly works extremely well in our favor. Ice Shard is then able to finish it off. Ditzian comes out and faints to Gammoth as well. Smearguard comes out and I switch into Glavenus. Glavenus is able to beat it, but at the cost of its own life. I then pick up Eevee. I then catch a Growlithe. After some grinding, Ekans and Eevee evolve. I then fuse them to make Tobi Kadachi. I then take on Erica. She starts with Oroaldo, and I start with Legaicrus. Legaicrus unfortunately misses the Aqua Tail, but survives the Rock Slide. She then switches to her Scoleon. Aqua Tail did decent damage to it. I then switch to Fatalis, who kills it with Air Slash. Oroaldo comes back out, so I switch to Nuzlocke, who is able to get in a Stomping Tantrum, doing some damage to Oroaldo, but unfortunately faints because of not being able to do any more damage to it. I bring Legaicrus back, and he lands the Aqua Tail and defeats Oroaldo. Her Volcalum is her last Pokemon. I tried using Ice Fang, but Legaicrus missed and barely survives a Giga Drain. I then swap to Fatalis, who's able to take it down with a few moves, winning me the badge. I then return to the Pokemon Tower and battle the Haunted Girl. Legaicrus is able to take care of most of her Pokemon, and Fatalis finishes off her last Pokemon. I then get the Pokeflute. I catch a Vigoroth in Safari Area 2 and then pick up Surf. I also catch a Trico to complete my Poke fusion. I then catch Bagon with the pokeradar. I also catch an Axew, a Beldum, and a Tackle to complete the Rajang fusion. I then fuse Trico with Kecleon and Axew with Onix. Vigoroth then evolves into Slaking. I then fuse him with Tauros to make Rajang. Close enough.
After some training, Gameth evolves and Dalmador also evolves twice. I then catch a Zoroark. Afterwards, I trade Golbat for a Gligar. Next is Koga, who is a Dark type user this time around. I start off with Dalmador, and he starts with Mimiark. Dalmador is able to get 2 Dragon Dances and defeats Mimiark. Weerion comes out. Click Claw allows Dalmador to move first. I try to get a flinch with Rock Slide, but unfortunately I don't get it. Dalmador falls. At least he was able to get some decent damage in. Gameth would have been able to finish it off if it wasn't for his Hyper Potions. Gameth brings it down pretty low, and then he switches into his Haunch Drive, which goes to the red, allowing a second Stomping Tantrum to kill it. Agent Turn is Gameth's next victim. Weerion causes Gameth to go into hibernation. Lagiacrus finishes off Weerion and winning me the battle. Gameth then evolves and isn't dead. Huh. Sweet. Next I head to Diglett's cave and catch a Kibble. I also catch a Geodude after smashing some rocks. I then fuse them together. While battling some Team Rocket grunts, Gameth unfortunately faints. Brachydios then evolves. After beating up some more grunts, Brachy evolves again. While battling another grunt, another unfortunate moment happened with us losing our starter, Fatalis. After some grinding, Pukei evolves. Brachydios also evolves. On my way to put a stop to Giovanni, I run into guild member who wants to battle. I start off with Rajang, and he starts off with Delbrock. A Hammer Arm is able to one-shot it. Hammer Arm does pretty good damage to his Sharprona. Rajang then heals with Slack Off. After 2 strengths, his Sharprona goes down. Fraxogon goes down to 2 strengths as well. After a Glare and several Thunderfangs, Ninard is defeated. Lagiacrus then defeats Reunion with 2 crunches. Pokey then beats his last Pokemon, Whimsray, with several X-Scissors. We then take on Giovanni. I start with Nargacuga. I use Embargo on his Haunch Zing to keep it from using Black Sludge. I use U-Turn on Haunch Zing to get some decent damage and switch to Tobikadachi. Crunch does decent damage to his Agamagius, but heals with a Citrus Berry and kills Toby with a Shadow Ball. Dub Rock finishes Haunch Zing off. Sharprona defeats Agamagius, and Rajang defeats Kekyon. Pokey takes down his Cratapex. Predicting an earthquake, I have Pokey use Detect. Ninard gets it down enough for it to faint to possibly a Life Orb. Giovanni then flees once again. I accidentally pick up Chikorita. Oops. I head to Johto and get a Dusk Stone. I use it on Gligar to evolve it. I then fuse Zoroark and Gliscor to complete the Nargacuga fusion. I then catch a Feedbass and a Vulpix for the Mizutsune fusion. I then fuse them together. After some training, Mizutsune evolves. I then take on Sabrina. She starts off with Toga Tails, and I start off with Lagiacrus. Toga Tails proves to be especially bulky. After Lagiacrus gets it down to the yellow, I switch to Rajang, who's able to take it down with strength. Rosevoir comes out and Rajang brings it to the yellow before going down. Mizutsune finishes it off with a flamethrower. I switch to Lagiacrus to deal with Mirokyu. I try to set up with Dragon Dance, but Mirokyu kills him with Play Rough. Pokey is able to bring it to the yellow before fainting. Mizutsune is able to finish it off. Clefclang is her final Pokemon, and this ends up being like a stalemate for a while, but eventually Mizutsune comes out victorious. I then trade Paras for Yanma and fuse it with my Noibat. I then pick up Honedge. I fuse it with my Shuckle to make Hermitaro's Sword and Shield. I then find a Tyrant in the Pokemon Mansion and catch it. While making my way through the Pokemon Mansion, Astalos evolves. I then find Blaine and he heads back to the gym. After some training, Astalos evolves, Brachydios then evolves. Wait a minute, that's not right. There it is. Bagon also evolves all the way to Salamence. Beldum also evolves all the way to Metagross. Hermitar, Sword and Shield also evolves all the way. I then fused Salamence and Metagross to make Valstrax. I then take on Blaine. He starts with Mr. Clang and I start with Astalos. I get a Tailwind up and try to use Bug Buzz, but Mr. Clang has Soundproof, nullifying Bug Buzz. I then switch to Nargacuga, who is able to one-shot it with Foul Play. Magmorish also gets one shot. Woblord was a little scary. I used Toxic to poison it. Luckily he just goes for Body Slams. After 2 foul plays and a U-turn, Woblord is defeated. I then switch to Hermitar, Sword and Shield, and he brings out Magmorphs. Gross is right. I tried to Toxic him but failed due to a flinch and he became burnt, which I did not notice until a bit later. I continued to do damage and use King Shield and eventually he went down, winning me the badge. I then head to Mount Ember to stop Giovanni once and for all. I started off with Hermitar, Sword and Shield and managed to land a Toxic onto the Articuno head, but Hermitar, Sword and Shield dies. Next, I bring out Astalos to use Ancient Power to weaken Articuno. He does okay damage, but faints. I tried to finish Articuno off with Valstrax using Bullet Punch, but it wasn't enough and he ends up fainting. Mizutsune is able to survive a critical Thunderbolt and finishes Articuno off. I then switch into Brachydios, who's able to beat the Moltres head. I then switch to Nargacuga to finish Zapdos off. Giovanni then flees once again. Enjanath then evolves. I then catch a Grimer in the sewer. I also catch a Noibat. Grimer and Noibat then evolve after some training. I then fuse them together to make Valhazak. I then catch Zapdos and a Vigoroth to make Furious Rajang. I fuse them together and after some training it evolves. I then take on Giovanni. He starts with Ditzian and I start with Nargacuga. I land Toxic on it. He lands a Toxic on Nargacuga as well. I then use U-turn, doing a good amount of damage to it. I bring Mizutsune out and he switches to Bai and Surf does decent damage to it. I then use a Flamethrower which does a lot of damage and burns it. He then uses Rest and I had Mizutsune use Nasty Plot. I set up another Nasty Plot, use Recover, and a Flamethrower is able to one-shot it. Snorlax comes out next and gets one shot. Tyran King comes out and also gets one shot. Mapam outspeeds and lands a Karate Chop, but Mizutsune survives and kills it with Flamethrower. Ditzian returns and outspeeds with a Surf, causing Mizutsune to faint. I tried to see if Nargacuga could outspeed, but unfortunately Ditzian is faster and kills Nargacuga. The poison does finish Ditzian off, winning me the badge. With 2 team members gone, I refill the spots by catching a Mudkip to create Ivory Gyarados with Gyarados, and I receive Aerodactyl to fuse with a future Sandshrew to create Seregios. Before getting the second half of Seregios, I battled with Guild Member. He starts with his Fraxments and I start off with Furious Rajang. I get a Thunder Wave on him, paralyzing him and making my monsters faster than it. After 2 strengths, Fraxments goes down. Rock is next. I get another Thunder Wave on it. Slack Off restores Rajang to full health and Paralysis pops off. I use Strength to pop the stupid air balloon. He uses Head Smash, doing decent damage to Rajang and himself. With leftovers and a Slack Off, Rajang goes back to full health. I switch to Ivory to set up some Dragon Dances, allowing Earthquake to one-shot Rock. 3 Earthquakes takes down Whimsy Ray. 2 Earthquakes defeats Runerion. Sharprona comes out, so I bring Rajang back out. I land a Thunder Wave, but get pretty low on health. I switch to Valhazak, who is able to take Sharprona down, and Janath then takes care of his Shed Sharp. Afterwards, I catch a Sandshrew and fuse it with Aerodactyl, and it evolves into Seregios. While in Victory Road, I find Entei and catch it. I then fuse Entei with a Shelgon, and it evolves into Teostra. I then assemble my best team and take on the Elite Four. Elite Four on Remix mode honestly is insane. Everyone has a legendary fusion, so I don't even feel bad about my team. Also, everyone has a full team, so yeah, things get a bit crazy. Lorelei is our first challenge, and she is a water type user this time around. I start off with Seregios and kill her Rotoad with an Earthquake. Valhazak kills Garyaku with 2 Sludge Waves. King Star goes down to some Poison and a Wild Charge. Buyukuli goes down to a Wild Charge. I land a Thunder Wave on Scar Tops. I top Rajang's health with Slack Off. Wild Charge almost kills Scar Tops. Waterfall does a good amount of damage to Rajang. I use Slack Off to heal up, and she switches to her Milotina. I paralyze it with a Thunder Wave. I use Strength to try and get some damage in, and it does alright. She then lands a Toxic. A second Strength brings her down to yellow. Rajang gets pretty low on health, so I switch to Valhazak. 2 Dragon Pulses are able to beat it, and a Dragon Pulse finishes off Scartops. Bruno is my next opponent. He starts with Tyrandra, and I start with Seregios. Seregios is able to one-shot Tyrandra with an Earthquake powered up by Soft Sand. King Ron comes out. I use Earthquake, which does a lot of damage, but Seregios gets one shot by Crabhammer. Ivory is able to finish it off with an Earthquake. Armblade comes out. It lands a First Impression, which doesn't do much. I set up 3 Dragon Dances and use an Earthquake to one-shot it. Meroperior barely survives an Earthquake. Ivory dodges the Stone Edge and kills it with Surf. Crowdlove dies to Rock Slide. Aerodon goes down after 2 Earthquakes. Agatha is my third opponent. She starts with Toxtrum, and I start with Brachydios. It takes 3 Earthquakes to kill it because it would survive 1, and then she would heal. And the third one was a high roll. Clefraid gets one shot by Earthquake. Cropass faints to 1 Earthquake as well. Heizing is stupidly bulky and has Levitate, causing it to have no weaknesses. 2 sets of Rock Blast gets it down to about half. I switch to Valhazak, who survives an Earth Power. Dragon Pulse pushes it more into the yellow. I then switch to Ivory, who defeats Heizing with 3 Surfs. Alligar comes out, so I switch to Brachydios thinking it would go for Thunderbolt, but instead it goes for Shadow Ball, causing Brachydios to get low enough for Poison to kill. A Crunch from Teosha brings Alligar pretty low. She calls it back and brings out her strongest Muo, and Crunch barely did damage to it. I switch to Rajang for type advantage. I tried to paralyze it with Thunder Wave, but missed, and she lands the Sacred Fire, causing Rajang to get burned. This causes Rajang's attacks to be cut in half. I land the second Thunder Wave. She then goes for Minimize to increase her evasion. I managed to land a Wild Charge, but it doesn't do much damage. She then switches again, allowing me to get a safe heal with Slack Off. Strength then kills Alligar. Muo comes back out, and this time Wild Charge does a lot more damage. I heal up with Slack Off twice. Another Wild Charge pushes Muo into the red, and after 2 strengths, it faints. Lance is the final member of the Elite Four. He starts off with his Dark Knight, and I start off with Rajang. I land a Thunder Wave on it. He wastes a full restore on Dark Knight, and I land a Wild Charge, doing decent damage. I land another Thunder Wave, and he misses the Fire Blast. Whew. A second Wild Charge finishes it off. Sepdactyl lands a Drain Punch, bringing Rajang to the yellow. Luckily, Leftovers brings it back to the green. I switch to Teosha and one-shot it with Sacred Fire. Metamence is able to handle his Sacred Fire thanks to Intimidate, but it gets burned. I then switch to Rajang, and he heals with a full restore. I paralyze it with Thunder Wave. I heal up with Slack Off. Wild Charge takes it to the red, and Zen Headbutt brings Rajang to the yellow. I use Slack Off again, and he switches. Nyria barely survives a Wild Charge. He switches again. Strength does solid damage to Toga Flame. Wild Charge finishes it off. Strength finishes off Nyria, and Wild Charge ends Metamence. Steven is his last Pokemon and ends up being a Steel Dragon, so I switch to Ivory, who kills it with 2 Earthquakes. With Lance out of the way, it was time to take on Guild member one last time. He starts with Ninsharp, and I start with Teosha. Sacred Fire nearly kills Ninsharp, but it survives thanks to a Focus Slash, and he uses Baton Pass to make his getaway. He brings out Haxmence. Teosha is able to survive an Outrage and does a lot of damage with Dragon Claw. I then then switch to Rajang to tank the outrage. With 1 strength, Haxments is defeated. Torturnion comes out and has 3 types: water, grass, and fire. He uses Aqua Jet, which doesn't do much, and I land a Thunder Wave. Strength does okay damage. He goes for a Giga Drain, which does some damage. I heal up with Slack Off, and thank goodness I did, because he goes for a close combat, which honestly helps me since his defense goes down. I use Strength again, bringing him deeper into the yellow. I use Slack Off again to heal, and he goes for another close combat. Holy crap, he wants me dead. So another close call. Strength is then able to kill it. He brings out his strongest Necro Ray. I go for Slack Off to heal up. He transforms and goes for Photon Geyser, doing a lot of damage. Sheesh. I go for Slack Off again, and he gets a critical Photon Geyser, leaving Rajang in the red. So at this point, there's no point trying to save Rajang, so I go for a Strength, which takes about a quarter of his health down before fainting. Crunch from Teosha brings Necro Ray to deep yellow. A second crunch finishes it off. Age of Rock kills Teosha with a Cellar Rock. Shadow Claw barely phases Ivory. Rock Slide pops the stupid balloon. Ivory barely survives a head smash, heals up from a Citrus, and kills Age of Rock with an Earthquake. Runevion comes out. I use Rock Slide to flinch it, and it works. I try again, but don't get the flinch. Ivory manages to hold up on 2 HP and lands an Earthquake, bringing it to yellow to then faint. I bring out my last monster, Val Hazak. One Sludge Wave finishes it off. Ninsharp then faints to Dragon Pulse. And there we have it, folks. Thus answering the question of, can Monster Hunter beat Pokemon Infinite Fusion? With these results, hopefully y'all are satisfied with the answer as I am. And if you want to see more Pokemon Fusions, then you will definitely enjoy this next video.